Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I hate this argument. In fact, I loathe taking part in it almost more than any other argument I ever take part in. For why? Because I have to come up here and defend the religion of love, brotherhood, peace, justice, and turning the other cheek rather than kicking the other guy in the crotch. And I have to listen. I have to listen while I'm doing it to these gentlemen who remind me constantly of the most irritating, infuriating, revolting person I ever knew, namely my adolescent self. Honestly. I mean, haven't we all heard it all before? Horus, Mithras, they're all the same. No, they're not all the same. They all disagree with each other. They must be wrong. They can't all be right. This is the stuff of sixth form debate. There has been nothing serious said against the concept of God by the opposition this evening at all. I am expecting something serious to come from the third speaker, but there hasn't been anything so far. I'm really hoping, because it would be nice, because this is not fundamentally a serious discussion as it has been held so far from the other side. And it's not serious for a very simple reason. It's not arguing about what we ought to be arguing about. I'm going to have a little bit of poetry here for those of you who appreciate that sort of thing. It's from the 38th chapter of the book of Job. God speaks from the whirlwind, and he asks, "Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof?" The answer, ladies and gentlemen, from the opposition is they haven't a clue. Nor have I. Nor has anybody in this room. We haven't the faintest idea. Nothing that any of us could say here tonight could convince anybody that they knew that God existed. What we are discussing here is a matter of opinion. And a matter of opinion, Mr. President, is a matter of choice. And the real question before us is why we choose what we choose. And this is the most fascinating part of the argument, addressed by the most intelligent and interesting atheist, I think now living, Thomas Nagel, who asks repeatedly, why is it that I and my fellow atheists so much want there not to be a God? Why is it, ladies and gentlemen, they so much want there not to be a God? Why would you want there not to be a God? Why would you want to live in a purposeless chaos in which none of your actions had any significance, in which there was no hope of justice, in which the lives of all those whom you loved ended abruptly at death and had no further significance? Why would you want, desire, actively wish to live in a universe as disgusting as that? You'd have to have a very good reason. And I think these gentlemen do have a very good reason, and it's what they never, ever wish to discuss. They don't want justice. They do want the dead to be dead. They do want the universe to be purposeless. They do not want their own individual actions to have any other significance than their immediate effect. You will have to discuss with them why they should be so keen on that proposition. But from our side of the argument, what we say is that if we desire justice for ourselves, we also desire it for other people. And likewise, if we desire it for other people, we require it for ourselves and we bring it upon ourselves. And on the basis of that, we construct, with some difficulty, with a certain amount of historical knowledge, in the case of some of us with an enormous amount of scientific knowledge of the universe, we construct a belief which helps us to discover, insofar as it is possible, what it is we ought to do and how it is we ought to live, in the belief that there is justice, that there is hope, that death is not the end, that our actions have a significance beyond what we immediately do. That really is what we are discussing. Do you want it or do you not want it? If you don't want it, then you can simply turn with raillery and badinage and mock the beliefs of others. I don't care to do that. I think atheists have a serious point of view. I understand why they seem so anxious to press it upon you. And I know, thanks to the general destruction and retreat of institutional Christianity in our society, that many, many people growing up feel under a great deal of conformist pressure because it is very fashionable to follow atheism at the moment. And I also know that a number of people who are in the end servants of power are quite anxious to dispel from our society the enormous force of restraint upon power which Christian belief provides. It's interesting that we had, he wasn't properly named, but Laplace quoted earlier on this evening as mocking the idea that he needed any such concept as God because he understood the universe perfectly without it. Quite why it stays up, I don't know, but he thought that he didn't need that explanation. Look up Laplace, some of you, and find out what an extremely nasty piece of work he was. I've no wonder he had no need for the concept of God. People like that don't, because God in our society stands very much against. And this is why I, after many, many years of not believing in God, came round to the view that I would choose to do so and act as if there is a God. God is the principal opposition in our society to lawless, ruthless power. To the bully, to the autocrat, to the despot, to the criminal, to the person who treats his neighbors like dirt. Fundamentally, once we have dispensed with that concept in our society, we are left with nothing. Now, the atheists don't wish to discuss this because they know exactly what I'm saying. They're very well aware of the implications of what I'm saying for society in general. They know perfectly well that if everybody didn't believe in God, the comfortable lives they live in extremely agreeable suburbs, where they can trust people not to cheat them and rob them and mug them and rape them, would come to an end. They want to keep the secret to themselves. They want to have all the joys, not just now, all the joys and all the advantages provided by Christianity, but not pay the dues. No, not just now, because I'm just finishing. I normally do, but this evening I've decided not to. I've decided just to give them a Christian kicking. And that is why, when you challenge the atheist side on this very point, they run from it, refusing to discuss it. That is why nobody ever answers Thomas Nagel's question, why is it that they so much want there not to be a God? Well, I'll tell you exactly why. It's for precisely the same reasons as I very much want there to be one. Vote for the motion, please.
In the dialogue above, the two speakers advance the argument that the debate about God's existence cannot ultimately be settled by objective proof, but is instead a matter of personal choice shaped by what we desire the universe to be. I contend that this claim is only partially correct and overlooks a crucial distinction between psychological preference and objective truth. Peter Hitchens begins not with evidence, but with frustration. This rhetorical move is deliberate. By expressing disdain for the debate format itself, he reframes the discussion. He suggests that the atheist opposition has not presented serious philosophical objections, but rather recycled cliches. This opening move accomplishes two things. First, it lowers the perceived intellectual credibility of the opposition. Second, it subtly shifts the burden of seriousness. But then comes something more interesting. He reads from the book of Job. This is not merely a theological flourish, it is strategic. The passage from Job confronts human epistemic limitation. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? The implication is clear. Human beings are radically limited in knowledge. Therefore, neither side can claim absolute certainty. This is a powerful move rhetorically, but philosophically, it must be examined carefully. If no one has a clue, as Hitchens himself admits, then two conclusions are possible. 1. Either we suspend judgment. 2. Or we acknowledge that limited knowledge does not eliminate the possibility of rational inference. Hitchens appears to choose a third route, belief as existential commitment. He says explicitly, This is a matter of opinion and choice. Here lies the philosophical pivot. If the existence of God is reduced to choice, then belief becomes volitional rather than evidential. But truth claims about reality are not traditionally understood as matters of preference. We do not choose whether gravity exists. We do not choose whether electrons exist. We evaluate evidence and follow argument. So the crucial philosophical question becomes, is the existence of God more like gravity, an objective metaphysical claim, or more like choosing a moral framework for living? Hitchens blends these categories. By doing so, he introduces a subtle shift. He reframes God not primarily as an empirically demonstrable being, but as the foundational narrative necessary for meaning and justice. This reframing avoids one problem, empirical proof, but opens another. If belief in God is a choice because it provides existential meaning, does that make it true? The psychological appeal of a belief does not guarantee its ontological reality. However, here is where we must be fair. Hitchens is not naive. He openly admits epistemic limitation. That honesty is philosophically respectable. He is not claiming scientific proof. He is arguing that worldview commitments ultimately exceed empirical demonstration. In that sense, he is correct. Every worldview, including atheism, involves presuppositions that are not themselves empirically proven. Naturalism assumes the sufficiency of material explanation. Theism assumes transcendent grounding. Neither can be placed under a microscope, but the key difference is this. One may choose a worldview, yet the worldview itself still makes claims about objective reality. Therefore, the debate cannot be reduced to preference alone. To say this is a matter of choice risks collapsing epistemology into psychology, and that is philosophically dangerous. Truth is not determined by what we want to be true. The deeper issue is not what we desire, but what best explains the totality of reality, consciousness, moral obligation, rationality, causation, existence itself. If Hitchens had argued that theism provides a more coherent, explanatory framework, that would remain within philosophical discourse. But when the argument becomes, do you want it or not, the terrain shifts from metaphysics to existential desire, and that shift requires careful scrutiny. Let us sharpen the issue further. If belief in God is fundamentally a choice, then we must ask, choice based on what criteria? If the criterion is existential comfort, then belief becomes therapeutic. If the criterion is moral aspiration, then belief becomes instrumental. If the criterion is explanatory power, then belief returns to philosophy. Hitchens appears to oscillate between these criteria. He suggests that atheists want there not to be a God. This introduces motivational analysis. It implies that disbelief is driven by desire rather than reasoning, but this cuts both ways. One could equally argue that believers want there to be a God because they desire justice, meaning, and eternal hope. Desire alone cannot adjudicate truth. Therefore, the more rigorous philosophical path is this. We must evaluate explanatory scope, internal coherence, and correspondence to lived experience. Does theism better explain the existence of objective moral obligation, the intelligibility of the universe, the grounding of rationality, the human intuition of justice? These are serious philosophical questions. If Hitchens is implicitly pointing toward them, then his argument gains strength. But if the debate remains framed as what do you want the universe to be, then we risk reducing metaphysics to preference. The existence of God, if true, is not a lifestyle accessory. It is a claim about ultimate reality, and ultimate reality is not subject to referendum. Thus, while Hitchens is correct that worldviews involve existential commitment, he must go further. Commitment must be grounded in rational justification. The real debate is not, do you want God? The real debate is God the best explanation for the features of reality we cannot ignore? That is where the argument must move, and that is where the discussion becomes truly serious. The central argument presented in this speech is not primarily about scientific proof for the existence of God, but about the philosophical and moral consequences of belief versus disbelief. Peter Hitchens reframes the traditional debate by asserting that absolute empirical certainty about God is unattainable for both believers and atheists. Instead, he argues that the real issue lies in the kind of universe we choose to believe we inhabit and the moral framework that flows from that belief. At the heart of his reasoning is the claim that belief in God provides a foundation for justice, meaning, and moral accountability. He suggests that if the universe is ultimately purposeless and devoid of transcendent authority, then human actions lose ultimate significance and justice becomes temporary and incomplete. From this perspective, belief in God is not merely a theological preference, but a framework that sustains hope, moral responsibility, and the expectation that justice extends beyond death. Hitchens further argues that religious belief historically acts as a restraint on unchecked power. According to his view, the concept of God stands as a moral counterweight to tyranny, lawless authority, and human cruelty. Without such a transcendent reference point, he suggests that societies risk drifting toward moral relativism or the dominance of raw power. In this sense, his argument is civilizational rather than purely metaphysical. He sees religious belief as a stabilizing force that undergirds social trust and ethical behavior. However, this argument also raises important philosophical questions. If belief in God is framed as a choice shaped by moral and existential desire, then the distinction between what is psychologically comforting and what is objectively true becomes crucial. A belief may provide meaning and moral structure, but its emotional or social usefulness does not by itself establish its truth. Therefore, the debate ultimately returns to a deeper inquiry: whether theism offers a more coherent and comprehensive explanation of reality than atheism, particularly regarding moral objectivity, human consciousness, and the longing for justice. In conclusion, the speech advances a worldview argument rather than a strictly evidential one. It contends that belief in God functions as the most compelling foundation for meaning, justice, and moral order, while also acknowledging that such belief cannot be proven with absolute certainty. The core issue, therefore, is not merely whether God can be empirically demonstrated, but which worldview best explains human experience and sustains a coherent vision of reality.